Hey, everybody. Welcome to the White House and welcome to the White House Economics Summit. We're really happy that you were able to come today. We have small businesses from all around the country. We have truckers, hotel owners, businesses of all kinds from around the country. And we're glad to have you here to talk about the progress America is making and this administration's making in revving up the American economy and keeping it going. We have a great program for you today. We're going to have two panels, one that's going to be on tax reform and one that's going to be on regulatory reform. These are two of the pillars of the president's agenda that have really created, unprecedented growth at a time when there were naysayers all around. And it's you folks in this room and out in the country that have made this program work, that understand the needs of business and what makes businesses want to grow and want to invest. So we are thrilled to have you here and look forward to a really good discussion. With that, I'm going to kick it off today to the head of the National Economic Council, who has been a real pillar throughout his career in terms of the benefits of tax and regulatory reform, and has really pushed an agenda here at the White House that has been helpful to all of us and to the country. And so with that, I'll introduce Larry Kudlow. Larry?
On. Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. Great pleasure. Thank you for coming. We welcome you. Looks like a full house to me, so thank you ever so much. Appreciate it. We are going to talk about tax reform and tax cuts and regulatory reform. My dear friend and colleague Kevin Hassett's going to take the baton on regulatory stuff after we're done with the tax panel. I just want to begin with some opening thoughts. I gave a speech to the New York Economic Club a week ago or so, and Donald Trump gave his speech 2 years ago, almost to the day, unveiling his plan. And I just want to read to you what he said, because really this was promises made and promises kept. Here's a quote. "We reject the cynicism and the pessimism that our economy can never grow as it did once before." And I'm a great believer, since World War II up to the year 2000, we grew at 3.5% a year, GDP growth after inflation. Since 2000, we've only grown at 2% a year. And there's no reason why we can't go back to the post-war growth mark. And we're already showing it, probably coming on faster than even we thought. But we got 3.2% growth in the first half, 4.2% in the second quarter. Some of the Federal Reserve estimates has it up at over 4% in the third quarter. We'd be happy if it stays above 3%. But I think the president's pledge is turning out. He said also, if we lower our taxes and remove destructive regulations and unleash our vast treasure of American energy and negotiate trade deals that put America first, then there is no limit to the number of jobs we can create and the amount of prosperity that we can unleash. Said that 2016, September, New York Economics Club. And finally, America will truly be the greatest place in the world to invest, hire, grow, and create new jobs, new technologies, and entire new industries. So that was apocryphal. I want to just begin with two charts. There we go. This is a remarkable chart. This is consumer confidence. I think it's the University of Michigan survey. No, it might be the Conference Board survey. In any case, virtually from the day of the election, confidence starts to head north abruptly and steeply, and it's not done yet. It's not done yet. Now, I've been around a while in one way or another covering this beat, and I've never seen anything like it. From the day of the election. Now, the second chart is small businesses from the NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business. I think many of you are small business people, and our panelists are too. Look at that. It's really quite remarkable. So sometimes attitudes change fast. Americans respond to incentives and optimism. I've been a great believer down through the years that a healthy economy not only makes us a better country, makes us better people, makes us more optimistic, and we're better to each other, and it solves a lot of problems. I've always believed that, and I still do. And of course, one reason why I've been so strong for President Trump going way back to 2015 is that he believes that as well. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I just do want to mention some of the big picture themes that we have. One of the things the President has done, besides cutting taxes for individuals and businesses and besides rolling back regulations, he's made it clear that he aims to end the war against business, which we've seen too much of in prior years, and end the war against energy, and maybe most importantly, to end the war against success. You know, the program is designed to reward success, not penalize it. You know, lower tax rates, you keep more of what you earn, you keep more of what you invest, you keep more of what you risk. In earlier administrations, you were punished for it, not now. And I think that's one reason for the remarkable consumer confidence. So, you know, we've had better growth. We've had tremendous job creation, lower unemployment across the board, big blue-collar job creation. I don't know if you saw it, wonderful story in the Washington Post about 2 weeks ago. You know, the Post is a famous supply-side newspaper. And they ran a front-page story above the fold talking about the massive creation of blue-collar jobs, which was something the country needs along with the rest. And as I said earlier, the unemployment rates have dropped for everybody, including, and maybe most especially, minority groups were at record lows or virtual record lows going back 50 or 60 years. Fatter paychecks, blue collars, employment, growth, optimism, prosperity. It's my kind of story. It's my kind of story. And I hope it's yours as well. So we'll leave it at that, and I want to bring in our panel. And we have some more special panelists coming. But we'll start with our stalwarts. Adrienne Trimble, President and CEO of National Minority Supplier Development Council. She travels the country and is in touch with small businesses everywhere. Steve Califer, owner, president, and CEO of Flemington Cars and Truck Dealerships throughout New Jersey. And Adam Kraus, co-owner of J&R Tools. And he's been, he tells me he's been selling a lot of goods to the Army and the Navy. Yes, sir. All right. Well, we appreciate that very, very much. We're waiting for Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Ivanka. Anyway, they'll come around. There they go.
And that was our cue to come out.
Both of you. Thank you.
I don't want to kiss. Don't worry.
Fantastic. Right on schedule. We were all up in New York for the UN meetings. I'm glad we're back down here. Steve Mnuchin, of course, is the Treasury Secretary, a dear friend. He was one of our team leaders when we developed the tax cut plan during the campaign, and it's worked very well. Ivanka Trump is a presidential counselor, advisor to the president, and she's running the National Council for the American Worker, and I really want to hear some discussion of her project because this is futuristic stuff of reskilling and helping people cope with the new economy and fitting in. Secretary Mnuchin, let me begin with you. Nothing's ever good enough in Washington, D.C. or New York or elsewhere, so we've got ourselves what I think is the beginning of an economic boom, maybe the greatest story never told. Let me ask you, is this boom sustainable, or as our critics keep saying, it's just a short-term sugar high?
Well, Larry, those same people who say it's not sustainable are the same people who said we'd never get to 3% GDP. So I think, as you and I agree, it is very sustainable for the next few years. It's hard to predict out more than a few years. But Larry, I remember when we were on the plane with the president on Trump Force One, his plane at the time, on the way to the Detroit Economic Club, where we launched the tax plan. And as you and I have been committed from day one, 3% sustained GDP growth has been our goal, and that's trillions of dollars of additional revenue to the Treasury.
And we've done it before for long periods of time, as I mentioned to the group. I mean, that's really most of America's history. The slump was more recently. So 3%, not 2% or 1%.
Absolutely. 3% sustained economic growth. And again, the difference between 2 and 3%, trillions of dollars, great wages for hardworking taxpayers, and more jobs.
All right. Final point.
And
Steve.
you were both there when this was said during the course of the campaign. This was greeted with derision and laughter. People didn't believe it was possible to achieve that. So to have accomplished it in such short order is truly remarkable.
You were on that Detroit plane, weren't you?
I was.
I know. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. You're right. Well, never give up. Stephen, one last point before we get to Ivanka and her new project. International competitiveness. So president's out there designing important trade reforms for level playing field and reciprocal trading rights and tariffs and so forth. How much more competitive will this plan on taxes and regulations make American business, and what have you seen so far?
I think it's just an absolute game changer. So first time this was taxes were really changed in 30 years significantly. And one of the most significant aspects is we went from what we call a worldwide tax system to a territorial system. But our worldwide tax system was so ridiculous that we taxed on worldwide income, but if you left the money offshore, you didn't pay U.S. taxes. So not a surprise, U.S. companies accumulated trillions of dollars offshore. We're seeing that money come back. So the combination of territorial, the combination of 21%, a very competitive corporate rate, and the third component of the pass-through rate, lowest pass-through tax rate since the 1930s. You combine that all with a middle-income tax cut, and it's just a game changer for the U.S. economy.
The pass-through rate for small businesses everywhere.
That's correct.
All right, great. Now, Ivanka, you're running this National Council for the American Worker, and this is a very important project. And you have a word that I love.
Growth?
No. That's way too easy.
That's just because I know you so well, Larry.
Growthier. No, the word that I love, and I am adopting it in my own routine, is re-skilling, which I think is a fabulous word, fabulous phrase. Tell us about re-skilling and what you've been up to, please.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for hosting this summit and convening so many people here to talk about a topic that we're all passionate about, which is obviously tax reform, but the broader goal of tax reform and the broader goal of this administration's economic agenda, generally speaking, is to create increased prosperity and economic opportunity for all Americans. And how you do that is you create enhanced opportunity not only for businesses, small businesses, large businesses, and which will then reinvest in their workforces, but also you create opportunities for those who have been left behind and those who have been on the sidelines of the economy. And this is something that is less popular in an environment of low growth and high unemployment. So people are less focused on skilling and retraining and reaching out and embracing segments of the population that have not been given the opportunity. But now in this economy, because it's thriving, because it's booming, because of tax cuts, because of deregulation, the private sector is coming to us and they're saying, how can we help? We need workers. We need workers with these fundamental skills, and we're not finding them. So they're creating opportunities, and they're going into high schools and creating curriculum, and then they're accepting those graduates on the other end. They're working with technical schools and vocational schools and saying, you know, we'll develop these curriculums in partnership, and then those students graduating out of those programs without massive massive amounts of accumulated debt will have family-sustaining jobs. So there's this tremendous opportunity. You think about the prison system. 650,000 people a year come out of federal or state prisons. So the vast majority of those incarcerated will come back into the system. It's beneficial for them. It's beneficial for the communities they re-enter, for them to be able to get a job, to support themselves, to be given that second chance. So we're deeply passionate about this idea of reskilling, and why we think that there's such an opportunity to do it now is because the economy is so hot that employers are our partners in this mission. So this is the first time that this government has thought holistically about lifelong education, really from K through retirement, in a general way. So what are the vocational skills that are necessary to succeed at all the different phases of one's life? And I think this is particularly important at this age of rapid automation, because we spend less, and I'm talking about both public and private sector investment. We spend less than any country in the developed world other than Mexico on reskilling mid to late career workers. So everyone talks about a shortage of workers with the appropriate skill set, yet very little money is reinvested into the workforce.
Who's doing it,
and we're trying
Ivanka?
to change that.
Who's doing it, importantly? Who are the leaders?
Well, we think the government's not particularly good on this front, particularly with sort of highly technical, demand-oriented skills, and that should be driven by industry. So in addition to the work of the council, which is going to be leveraging data so people can have better transparency around outcomes of educational choices. Very basic thing. When you think about innovation, right, in data collection, you look at all your weather apps. Those apps were innovated off of government weather data. There's been nothing like that for education. So now you want to know what are good schools, you look at U.S. News and World Report. We can do better than that. So we think there's a lot of ways to leverage data at the U.S. government to create transparency and innovation. But we also think it's critical to leverage the private sector and get them to be our partners in this. So we created something called our Pledge to America's Workers. Since launch, we've had over 100 companies sign up. They've committed to, and we're approaching the 5 million mark, to reskilling or offering apprenticeship opportunities to 5 million workers. So from companies like Walmart, who signed our pledge, and these are all new opportunities. For 1 million workers, to small businesses in Iowa who signed the pledge for 8. It's great. We want every American business to know how much they're investing back into their workforce and into ultimately what we consider their most important asset.
Can you reskill ex-TV broadcasters and NEC directors?
We're working on it.
It's a full-time job.
We'll let you know in 2 years. So far, so good.
Thank you. No, I just think this is really important, and coming out of the private sector is great leadership from Ivanka. Adrienne Trimble, you're traveling the country. So let me ask you a couple questions on this. You talk to small business, you talk to suppliers, if I have that story correct, and we appreciate you coming here, business-to-business relationships. First of all, it's a question I want all our participants to answer, but so we're talking about an emerging economic boom or prosperity. Adrienne, are people out there feeling it? Are they feeling it?
Well, I would have to say, first of all, for those of you who are not familiar, the National Minority Supplier Development Council represents and advocates on behalf of more than 8 million entrepreneurs in this country, entrepreneurs of color. So I think that's important for us to put that in context. As part of our membership, we also represent 1,200 corporations. They're our corporate members. And of those 1,200 corporations, most of them are Fortune 100 companies that are part of our advocacy plan and our outreach to minority suppliers. We also are the largest certifying body for any minority supplier in the country. So those are our constituents that we have in place. And I've been in this role since August 1, trying to get an understanding of what are some of their issues and challenges that they would like to see. And I think that we can all agree that the tax cuts have been helpful for them to some degree, for our larger businesses particularly. The ones that we're still trying to get our arms around and have an impact for are our smaller businesses. So it's really interesting to hear what will be coming next and what the impact of the tax cuts and job reforms will be for those smaller businesses, because we want to ensure that we have economic development across the board, particularly for entrepreneurs of color, as we look at our
deep.
As we look
you
at
know
those
what I mean?
communities.
When I say you're feeling it, to me, the thing works, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's got to go deep,
Yes.
into the country for everybody.
That's exactly right,
And
particularly
you're
in
seeing
those
some
distressed
progress. Is that fair or no?
I think that we are seeing a lot of opportunity, and I think that's what we're really interested about when we talk about the opportunity zones. We think those are great opportunities to think about ways that we can invest back into those communities and have opportunities for those that are typically underrepresented, underserved to have an opportunity and a voice.
Back in the last century, one of my great mentors, Jack Kemp, former Congressman Jack Kemp, vice president candidate, we tried to develop opportunity zones. They've had different names: empowerment zones, enterprise zones. Charlie Rangel in New York, by the way, put one together. So I think this is a great idea if we can get it out there. Can we?
I think we can.
We got work to do.
Yes, we have work to do, but I think we have committed resources that are willing and want to step up into this space because, again, the job growth that we can see from a minority supplier perspective, right now we have over $400 million annually that our minority suppliers contribute to the economy. They create over 2 million jobs per year. So I think those are huge numbers that can continue to grow, particularly in the emerging markets.
And that's power.
Yes.
That's power. Good for you. Fabulous stuff. Terrific stuff. So, Adam, are consumers opening their wallets? And I guess the military is opening its wallet. And your machine tool operation is expanding. I hear you're hiring. Tell us about it.
Well, we've actually hired 3 people in the past couple months. The defense budget helped out. My company is a small manufacturing company. We work mainly on contract to the Navy, Army, and the Marine Corps. We build parts. We got it's a machine shop. So anything that the Marine Corps, Navy, Army need, we'll machine it. We'll make it out of metal, aluminum, and all that stuff. So anything that they need, we'll make it.
Adam, has Secretary Mnuchin, he controls the purse strings around here. Has he given you, he's a very important, powerful guy.
Yeah, I'm going to get his card after we're done.
You got it. And he's very accessible, I might add. Has he given you enough dough to get this thing going?
Well, it seems like it. Business has picked up in the past 2 years. We've had good years before that, but in the past 2 years, we've really done well, and seems to be going pretty good.
And one last one that I was told about. One of your businesses is you will rent. See if I get this right. You rent equipment and then release it to businesses, particularly farmers in your neck of the woods.
We have a rental equipment that we do have that we do keep, just earth moving equipment, and we just rent that out to local businesses or farmers.
Is it gaining?
It's
it
moving
going?
along pretty good. We've bought several machines in the past couple of years.
I think what Adam just referenced, though, is one of the sleepers from a public knowledge perspective, but not from a small business or a large or medium-sized business perspective. This 100% capital expensing is a big deal because so many businesses. And you don't have people. It's like it's not like a great soundbite, but you have people who are buying equipment that they've wanted to buy, they've been waiting to buy. You have people investing in productivity, which this country was not in a good place in terms of productivity. It was declining. People weren't investing in upgrading their machinery, and that's going to create new opportunity.
And according to a smart guy named Kevin Hassett, that capital investment and that productivity goes mainly to, Kevin, where does that go? Who are the biggest beneficiaries of that? More capital per worker. Workers, the workforce, mainstream workforce, the folks. That's who the big winner is. And during the campaign, who was the biggest designer of the expensing provision and made it work? It's that guy in the navy blue suit over there at the end. He was the one. He deserves a hand for that. All right. Steve Calvert, car business. You're all over New Jersey. All over.
We're having a sale.
Do you want to go ahead? Give us your website. Oh, shucks.
Flemington.com. You show your admission tickets and they get extra $200 off.
Whoa, I love that. I love that.
And for the record, he's totally kidding.
Right. Thank you for that.
Do you have any Durangos?
Yes. But you asked me about the automobile business.
Yes, sir.
Our family business started in the gas station 42 years ago. And I had the optimism and dreams.
Thank you.
I had the optimism and dreams that a 26-year-old had. With what's happened with tax reform, what's happened with the enthusiasm and the optimism, you showed 2 charts. Those charts are what we're experiencing. People, business people feel that they can do better. Business people today no longer feel like they're enemies of the people. The tax reform that we were able to receive has all been reinvested in our workforce, in our capital expenditures. Outside of our automobile business, we have a significant real estate operation. It allowed us to go with confidence into Bayonne. We're a very good mayor, understands regulations. This is real. This is important. When we speak to the small company owner who's buying pickup trucks, who's trading in rusted pickup trucks because he didn't know or she didn't know what was going to happen in the future. This is real, this is sustainable, and we have to get the message out. We can't just be quiet.
You know, I'm going to brag on him again, as I often do. But I want to ask you, we're a free market economy. The government doesn't run our economy. But, government policies that can change incentives, as you say, so people can, grow their business, not be ashamed. And I think government attitudes, and the bragging I want to do is President Trump, who has, from day one, you look at those consumer confidence charts, from day one, has said this is what he wants. I'll say it again, quote, "We reject the cynicism and pessimism that our economy can never grow as it did once before. And if we lower taxes and regulations, unleash the vast treasure of American energy, negotiate good trade deals," here's the key line, America, there is no limit to the number of jobs we can create and the amount of prosperity we can unleash. That needed to be said, because we hadn't heard that in 20 years.
Larry, I need 20 technicians. I'll hire them tomorrow. We need more workers. We are growing our business. We have confidence in American policy for the first time in a long time.
Did you get Ivanka's card? She can help you.
Well, actually, to your point, we actually have workforce development programs. We partner with technical schools in our community. We have invested and continue to invest in training workers so that they have a trade. In the old days, a car mechanic was a car mechanic, and they were almost limited in their future. We have technicians now who are literally electrical engineers and have to be retrained and relearned, and some of them make 6 figures, quite frankly, and they deserve every penny of it.
I think there's just a general need to rethink human potential, right? So I think we can no longer have 3rd graders who can't read. We can no longer have students who are graduating from 4-year college loaded up with student debt without a skill that's hireable. And we can no longer denigrate very important and viable career paths that were once praised and that built this country. So I think what this president and this administration is committed to doing is saying that there are multiple pathways. We need mechanics. We need plumbers. We need people in the skills trade. We also need people in cybersecurity. We need people with advanced STEM degrees. So we have to be thinking about the whole spectrum as we think about future of work, not prioritizing any one category, but thinking about the skills that the jobs of the future will require of our workforce, and then developing it to that. And Larry, just to dovetail off one thing you just said, I think one of the statistics when you think about the potential and the statement you just read from the president, a single fact that's so amazing to me and is so exciting, and it should be so exciting to us all, is that at this point in history, there are more Americans working than ever before.
Yes, yes.
And that is, and we can still do better. We can still do better. We can still increase workforce participation rates. We can still continue to take people off the sidelines because there are good jobs that are there, and there are employers who are willing to provide the skills and invest in training people with those skills. But more people than ever before are working in this country, and that's something we can all be very proud of.
Secretary Mnuchin, can we sell this new approach, pro-growth, pro-prosperity incentive approach to our allies and friends around the world who sometimes don't listen but should?
I think we can indeed, Larry.
I mean, we went through this in the Reagan years when I was a child working, and he, literally a child, I was associate director of OMB. I was 17 years old. So I remember the GIPR went to the first economic summit, G7, I think it was 81, maybe 82, and they didn't pay him any respect at all. And he comes back in 83, the American economy is growing at 7-8% off of a deep recession, and they started listening. Now, you travel that international circuit, the high table of policy. Some of these countries want to lower their corporate tax rates, it seems to me, so there's a little bit of support for that.
Indeed. I think there's support for what we've done in our pro-growth policies. And Larry, you were the one who was there with the president at the G7 and said, you guys want free trade? Let's have no tariffs, no tariff barriers, no subsidies. So the president's push, free and fair reciprocal trade, is not only good for us, but good for everyone else. And if we can get China to behave like the rest of the world on trade and open up their markets, that'll be the single biggest opportunity for U.S. workers, U.S. companies, and good for them as well.
It's so important, just to stay with that for a moment. If they lower their barriers, tariffs, non-tariffs, and so forth, and you said before, we are so competitive now, we will export, sell everything, everything. And they'll benefit, and we'll benefit. That's the way it should work. Trade deficits will come down, there'll be more jobs, and they'll be better too for it, if we can just convince them to do it. Get those barriers down. I mean, President Trump has taken some heat for the trade policy. I say this all the time. Don't blame him. He inherited the mess. He's trying to open markets for everybody. Cars, farmers, workers, industry, you name it. And that's a very important part of this story. It's a tough fight, but it's a worthwhile fight. Adrian, let me come back to you. I was thinking, so much of our economy is business to business. You know, we look at the GDP and people say, well, consumers are 70%, business investment is 20, 25%. But actually, if you look under the hood, it's businesses buying and selling from each other. And you're involved in these supply relationships around the country. So how is the business to business story as you see it?
I think, again, from an NMSDC perspective, when we look at the 1,200 corporate members that are part of our organization and their supply chains, we see that there are a lot of emerging opportunities for our minority suppliers particularly, and we are seeing stronger contracting between the two entities. We're seeing where our minority suppliers are growing. We have some that are well over $1 billion now, and I think that is fantastic. I think where we're hoping that this will go is it goes back to a comment that was made earlier about the reinvestment back into communities and the job creation that can come of that once we have the ability to reinvest back into our communities and make sure that our minority suppliers are well positioned to be able to continue growing their relationships with our corporate members. I think that's been really key. Another point that you just mentioned, I was just over in Europe earlier this week attending the Minority Supplier Development Activity for UK, United Kingdom, and I think that's something that is also another opportunity as we talk about the global reach and the need for the barriers to be addressed, because our minority suppliers are also trying to do business globally with our corporate partners. So I think that we have to continue to work with the administration to make sure that their voices are at the table and they're being heard, because it does impact their ability to reinvest in their own businesses as well.
And if I may, I'd love to add something onto that, because I think it's important when you think about tax reform and you think about deregulation and you think about the economic agenda, so much of it is about unleashing the spirit of American entrepreneurship and innovation. And if you think about the fastest growing group, the fastest growing of any category, of any population of entrepreneurs in this country, it's African American women and Hispanic women. Because traditional corporate environments or very rigid non-corporate environments are not working for them. So they're starting their own businesses, and they're taking that leap and they're taking that chance. So reducing barriers for entrepreneurs has tremendously positive impact. That, in conjunction with the implementation of these opportunity zones, which was passed as part of tax reform, is, I think, going to have a great impact. But not only our actions, and Administrator McMahon can talk about this later, but there are things we're doing legislatively, obviously tax reform, but also administratively as well. The SBA in 2017 over 2016 recognized the fact that so many women were now seeking to become entrepreneurs because it worked better for them and for their families, and enabled them to both be providers and continue to provide, as women are disproportionately the ones who provide unpaid care for minors and adult dependents. So the SBA increased lending to women-led businesses by over $128 million in 2017 alone, and that's increasing going forward. So bringing down barriers, deregulating, enabling the spirit and unleashing the spirit of innovation in this country is going to lead to tremendous growth and opportunity in all communities.
Adam, is manufacturing dead? I read this all the time. Dead?
No, it's not dead.
We can't produce anything anymore? Is that true?
No.
You're in that business.
Where we're located in southern Indiana, there's an NSWC Crane. It's a naval base right in the middle of Indiana. It's largest employer in the state, and I'd say within a 50-mile radius of that base, there's probably 200 small manufacturing businesses, one of which we are, and everybody around that base is booming. We send parts up to Fort Wayne, up northern Indiana, and they work in different sectors of manufacturing, and they can't find people to work fast enough. They're hiring people left and right, and they still can't keep up with the work that's coming in.
When did this boom start?
We've talked to several people, and it was right around 2 years ago.
Yeah, isn't that funny thing? Yeah.
Funny how that works.
I didn't prompt him or pay him to say that. Okay, it's completely spontaneous.
We actually got in an argument with a guy in St. Louis who was selling out his business, and he was complaining about the things going on, and he said, work is starting to pick up. And we asked him, well, when did it start to pick up? He said, about 2 years ago. He said, but I don't know what's going on. He said, that don't seem right.
Well, that's okay. He doesn't have to know, as long as he's happy, as long as he's prospering. I mean, let's not be too political about this. But you also need to get Ivanka's card for these workers that you need.
I will.
So, Steve, are you feeling it? Are your customers feeling it?
They are. They come in. They're optimistic. They're not worried about they're losing their job. They're seeing building going around them. They're seeing real growth. Things are happening. You feel it. It's contagious. What we have to do, though, is get the message out even greater. Let us not be ashamed to be successful. Let us not be ashamed to represent American business. It is the stalwart of America.
Business people not evil?
No, you know, it's really
Making a buck, not such a bad thing.
yeah. You make a buck, you reinvest a buck, you get $1.50 back, you hire people, you help them live better lives, you're able to contribute to their college educations, the down payments on their homes. That's what American business is.
Secretary Mnuchin, where do we go from here? We want to keep this thing going, as you suggested at the top. This will be sustained. Next steps, future vision?
Tax 2.0. So first thing we need to focus on is extending the personal side to make sure that we lock in these middle-income tax cuts. I think that's very important. I think we're also focused, the president's very focused on infrastructure. That'll be a big focus of next year with the new Congress. And housing reform, something that we also think. We've had the GSEs controlled by the government for the next 10 years. We've got to get the taxpayers out of that risk business and fix that. But let me just give a short advertisement for the opportunity zones, which several people have mentioned. I expect we'll be putting out regulations in the next few weeks to clarify for taxpayers how they can make these investments. And I think we're going to see at least $100 billion of investment into opportunity zones. I think that it's an enormous opportunity. It's great for communities. I think you're going to see a lot of capital unlocked and reinvested into communities that really need this cash.
Adrian, what do you think? Right direction?
I think that's outstanding. And I'm hoping that there's a way that NMSDC can partner with you on this because, again, we have the access to our minority suppliers that I think are really connected to those communities and can be a great help in guiding how that reinvestment should take place.
All right, great. I think we'll... Really? Really?
Actually, even better, you can put car dealerships in those zones to sell those cars.
Yeah.
You sound like a car salesman.
All my life.
I love it.
It's a noble profession, noble profession. So we'll wrap, and we're going to turn this over to my pal Kevin Hassett, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, a very dear personal friend. They're going to talk about regulations. Linda McMahon's going to talk about small business and so forth. Budget Director Mulvaney's around here someplace in some panelists. Steve Califer, thank you very much. Adam Krause, thank you very much. Adrian, thank you very much. Adrian Trimble. Secretary Mnuchin, can't thank you enough. Ivanka Trump, you're terrific for coming over. We appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Palace? So we're going to begin right away. Secretary Mnuchin, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thanks. So, President Trump, in the remarks that Larry mentioned, always advocated really three things to turn the economy around. The first thing was tax reform, something that has been very near and dear to the hearts of me and Larry for many years. My chief of staff will follow the sort of news accounts and Twitter responses to my public appearances. And after I did the press conference with Sarah a couple weeks ago, somebody tweeted the following. Girls, find a guy who, when he talks about you, looks like Kevin Hassett talking about tax reform. That one made me smile. But the fact is that because of that, we decided that it was just an excessive intrusion on all of your time to have me talk about tax reform because I'm just insufferable on the topic. But instead, I'm here to talk about the second leg, really, of President Trump's agenda, deregulation. And specifically before this group, one of the things that we know about regulations is that regulations disproportionately harm small business. And the reason is that a really big industrial factory that's been operating for 50 years and has billions and billions in sales, they can afford the lawyers and the engineers even that have to re-engineer things when you change stuff a little bit. But the small business, especially the new small business, when you impose those costs on them, then you can put them out of business or discourage them from even starting. Now, I'm an economist and I'm not a politician, but the previous administration grew regulations at such a rapid rate, really about quadruple the rate of growth of the economy per year, that you could extrapolate. Einstein called compounding the most powerful force in the universe. And so you could compound the rate of regulation growth and see that basically the cost of regulation were going to take over the whole economy if we continued at that pace. The previous administration was regulating everything from puddles. They were regulating puddles. Puddles that you couldn't float a paper boat on were navigable waters. They were regulating the internet with rules that were written, more than 50 years ago, before the internet was even conceived of. They were regulating auto manufacturing and health insurance and franchise employment and community banking. And President Trump basically came in and he said, folks, we've got to do something about this. And he had a pretty simple command, really, for all of us. And let's see if I can, there's some of the regulations that we got. But the simple command was just this, that if you're going to put a new regulation in, then you got to take 2 out. And you got to not increase, and you got to not increase the costs, the overall costs of regulation. And so in an effort that was coordinated by Mick Mulvaney through OIRA, an office in the Office of Management and Budget that interacts with all the cabinet agencies to study regulation, Mick led an effort to study regulations, identify the ones that are essential, because after all, we don't want people dying of asthma because they have dirty air to breathe. But identifying the things that make no sense and doing something about it. We actually go through the lists of the things that we've changed, and some of them are just so ridiculous you can't believe you're doing it. I don't know if anyone here does anyone here make or own a helicopter? Okay, yeah, I figured as much. Linda, maybe, I thought. But, so there's, as an example, there was this regulation that said that before you could sell a helicopter, that you had to test fly it in the dark to make sure that the ambient light didn't reflect off the glass in a way that would make it hard for the pilot to see. And these test flights were risky, and so the test pilots were paid a lot of money. They had to go out and they had to fly the thing around in the dark. And it cost a little less than $40,000 per helicopter sold in the US just to do this test. And somebody thought, well, hey, why don't we instead, since the helicopter's inside a factory room, turn out the lights. And then turn on the lights inside the helicopter and then see if there's weird reflections. And if there are, adjust it. This test costs essentially nothing. And by making a little adjustment like that, we knocked almost $40,000 off the price of every helicopter sold in the United States. And so if you go through it, and I know that you all experience it every day, that you can see there's so much stuff that we used to do that just made no sense, and such an opportunity to improve things. And the final thing I'll say is that at EIG, Economic Innovation Group, an organization that I was on the advisory board of before I came here to the White House, we did a study on entrepreneurship in America, and we found that it was going close to zero by 2016. And in fact, that the millennial generation is the least entrepreneurial generation in American history, according to that study. That people just stopped starting businesses. And our view was that it was probably a lot because of all the costs of regulation. And so we've been successful, and as Larry showed you a chart that business capital spending has taken off, sentiment has taken off, and I put a chart up. I wanted to talk about the surprise that we had, which is that this deregulatory effort, we thought it was going to take years and years to really reap the kind of benefits that we expected. But we saw that there were benefits right away, because what we did is, as you can see, this chart shows you across agriculture, EPA, transportation, health and services, and other, the new economically significant regulations. And you can see that the count per year for President Trump is way below that of the previous presidents. And just a sec. And we studied why that had such a big effect, and we discovered something that you all know, which is that when government passes a new regulation, you got to stop doing everything, and you got to figure it out. And if you mess it up, then government lawyers are going to come and shut you down. And it's scary and costly. But the old regulations that we're fixing, and we're fixing aggressively, you figured them out 5 years ago. And so if we remove that regulatory burden on you, it's great. But knowing that there's not this sea of new stuff, cascading towards you, it turns out had a much bigger positive effect than we thought. And so here, to talk about that, we've got an extraordinary panel of really talented people, and Mick Mulvaney as well.
But these people on this side of the room got that. These people don't care.
But Mick Mulvaney is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and he's really been at the center of President Trump's deregulatory agenda. And after Mick lays out all the things that they've been doing, I'm going to turn to Linda McMahon, the administrator of the Small Business Administration, who's going to talk about all the progress they made since a year ago Valentine's Day when you were confirmed by the Senate and took over that great organization. And then after that, we've got two people who live in the real world and have to function under the regulations that government passes. Sandy Roller, the president of KNG Energy, and Lou de la Aguilera, the president and CEO and board member of U.S. Century Bank. And they're going to talk to you about how the changes in regulations and the change in the economic climate have affected their businesses, their lives, and the lives of the people that work for their firms. But before we turn to you guys, I'm going to start with Mick, who's going to give a little bit more color and detail to the president's deregulatory agenda. Mick?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out the best way, because Kevin and I and Linda have talked about this literally hundreds of times, but I have a second job. I work at the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection across the street, one of the federal regulators, and it's Hispanic Heritage Week or month, and Henry Cuellar came over this morning. He's a friend of mine. He's a Democrat congressman from Texas, and he just left. We had a breakfast and a brunch. And he described the proper approach to regulations in a way that I'd never heard before. He may have stolen this from you, because most of the good stuff I steal from you as well. But I'll share it with you folks, because we get accused all the time, and we'll talk today about the 2-for-1. And I actually think we did like 23 or 24 for 1 last year, how we've actually lowered, not only do we have a budget for the number of regulations, we have a budget for the dollar impact. So for every new regulation that Linda wants to put on there, of course she would never do that, but if she want to put a new dollar's worth of regulation on there, she has to go find a dollar's worth of regulation to get rid of, so we get neutral. And we actually did better than that last year. I think the first year, the net present value of the savings is roughly $8 billion worth of regulatory savings in the economy, which is a great first step. But Henry said it in such a way that I'm going to steal. And somebody asked him during the question and answer series, what does it mean to be a good regulator? Why do regulators exist? And he goes, I'll give you a baseball analogy. Baseball has to have rules. You have to have regulations. Otherwise, you can't play. If you're playing by one set of rules and I'm playing by another, you can't play the game. The game is built on rules, and you need to have them. In order to enforce the rules, you need to have an umpire. And that's fair, and everybody gets that. So what you don't need, and what starts to break down, is when the umpire starts to take sides. And the umpire is either with this team or with that team. In that case, it's no longer a game, and it's no longer fair, and it no longer functions. It's not the same thing. And I'm going to start selling that to my folks across the street at the Bureau, here at the Office of Management and Budget, where OIRA sits, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and say, look, that's our job. We are going to be in the job of being the umpire, of shooting it straight. Now, we're also going to do what we've been doing, which is to go and find the regulations that are there that are completely stupid. That's what we do. And the example that Kevin gave about the helicopter is one of literally thousands. I used to be in the fast food restaurant business, and when the Health Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, came out, we went through the math on what our menu board would have to look like. And if anybody here in the fast food business know exactly what I'm talking about, you in the pizza business? What are you in? Pizza business. Pizza was even worse. Pizza, I think some of the pizza franchisees came and said that if they followed the law to the letter and the rules and the regs, their menu board would be the size of a football field. Okay? That's just never, ever, ever going to happen. That is a situation where the government world gets detached from the real world. And I think one of the great things about what this administration has done, and I'll set this up, is we brought folks like Linda in, who used to be normal people. Before we did this, we had real lives, and we've operated in the private sector, and we know how regulations impact the real world. And I think if there's one other thing we can do between now and the end of our 8 years here, is to say, all right, not only are we going to focus on the number of regulations, and not only are we going to focus on the monetary impact, but we're going to work really, really hard to make sure the people who are writing the rules understand the impact that they have on you folks. And I think we've started to do that. I know we've done in large part because of your work. So with that, I'll always rather listen to her.
And the one thing about pizza, too, it's actually something that's been a surprise to me, that how many things we get involved in. And at some point, I was paying attention to the regulation of pizza menus. It's not something I studied in graduate school, but to really emphasize the president's leadership in this, and the way he's required us to focus on getting it right and interacting with you folks to get it right. That Scott Gottlieb, who at the FDA was sort of given these rules about pizza venues that he had, that they weren't his rules, but he had to enforce them. He required a massive amount of his staff to go out for pizza at all the pizza places around where the FDA is, and to come back and report on their menus, and to talk about ways that maybe the menus could be improved in a way that wouldn't impose costs on the business that were that bad. Wow. And so that Scott took a little bit of grief for trying to enforce. His job is to enforce the law. It wasn't a law that he advocated, but he runs the FDA. But he didn't make any decisions about it before a whole bunch of his staff members went out to pizza places with the idea of looking at the menus, understanding what the regs are, and trying to come up with a way where they wouldn't impose all these new costs on you guys. Did they succeed, by the way, do you think?
It's pretty extensive, the calories, and we put so many different toppings on there, so the extensive menu items and how much calories are.
Well, there's millions and millions of possible combinations.
Yeah, that's right.
And we all know how good pizza is for us. It's like, if I go and I decide I'm going to have pizza for the day, I know health, that's not the healthiest choice. So some of these regulations they just don't make sense.
Yeah.
It's a little bit credit. I know I should have a salad, but I'm going to have pizza.
Yeah, I like the pizza too. So now, so Linda, small businesses were really harmed the most by the aggressive expansion of regulations, and now you travel the country all the time. I'm amazed by your travel schedule, and you talk to real small business people. So what do you see on the ground?
It's interesting, Kevin. Thank you. And when President Trump, then President-elect Trump, asked me to take on the job of being the administrator for SBA, he said to me, look, I want somebody who's actually built a business. I want somebody who understands the ups and downs, what it's like to go into work every day, what it's like to sign both sides of the check. And I want somebody who can walk the walk and talk the talk. So when I go out, and I've now been since, as you mentioned, My tenure began on Valentine's Day in 2017. Since that time, I've been to 43 states. I've talked to over 800 business owners. I can't tell you how many businesses that I've toured to hear exactly what they have to say, because I believe of the 30 million small businesses that we have in this country, I'm their advocate. The SBA must be their advocate, and to bring back that information to Washington. And so I'm often asked, well, what specific regulation did you hear that small businesses wanted rolled back? And often when I'm talking to small businesses, they don't articulate a particular regulation. It is the volume of regulation that they have to contend with. And it's, as you referenced earlier, Kevin, small businesses don't often have a cadre of lawyers and accountants, et cetera, to make sure that they are complying with what the regulations are. They often don't even know what the regulations are. So they're often fined for things that they don't even know. I'll give you the bizarre example. I toured a business where the business of the company was nickel plating. And the owner of the company told me, he said, look, I get the fact. I'm using caustic chemicals here. I have to be regulated. They have to make sure that the fumes are properly ventilated, that my folks aren't going to get burned or whatever, by the chemicals that are here. And he said, so I have regulatory compliance all the time. He said, however, when I had one regulator come in, and boy, we had checked every box. We were right on. We were spot on with everything that day, except for the fact that the signs outside the men's and women's restroom were not regulatory size according to the manual. I said, do people get confused about that? And he said, no, they managed to find their way into the right bathroom. But he said he was fined $5,000. He wasn't given a warning. Look, this is, you're at a regular. It's not like the sign was this big. I saw it. The sign was good size. That's the kind of thing, though, that really turns off a small business owner and makes, I'll reaffirm what you said, it makes you afraid of what those regulations are going to be. And so I have heard from more and more small businesses now. We can't put our finger exactly on all of it, but we just know it's a less regulated environment. We don't have as many things that we're looked at all the time. And it's just made our lives, so much simpler. Now, if you look at specific examples, and I'm sure you're going to talk a lot more about this, but when we started, when we rolled back regulations under the Dodd-Frank Act, and our community banks were able to lend more freely to those people in their communities whom they knew that might not exactly have qualified, under all of the regulations for Dodd-Frank, but that the banker in the community knew and understood who those folks were. We now have more businesses that are starting. SBA is guaranteeing more loans, in the community areas, and credit unions. So that's an example of regulatory rollback that has absolutely benefited starting, growing, expanding businesses around the country.
Thanks so much, Linda. And that actually does bring us to Lou Della Aguilera, who's the president and CEO and a board member of U.S. Century Bank. It's one of the largest Hispanic-owned community banks in the state of Florida, with assets of $1.2 billion and 11 full-service banking centers. One of the things that really jumped out at Larry and me when we were talking about the economy on TV on CNBC over the last decade was the way that the Dodd-Frank Act really ravaged the community banking sector. And Larry, all the way back to when he was a Cub Scout in the Reagan administration, talked about how community banks are where entrepreneurship starts because they know the entrepreneurs they know.
I thought that was the Coolidge administration.
But I can remember before I came here, I was research director at the American Enterprise Institute, and one of our scholars, Paul Kupiak, studied what Dodd-Frank had done to community banks. And one of the most stunning statistics to me was that a bank has a regulator assigned to it that travels to meet with the bank and decide that they're adhering to the rules. And Paul had grabbed the data and found that the average salary for the regulator assigned to a community bank in the U.S. For the regulator is about double the average salary of the president of the bank that he regulates. And so you know, and that's just like one way to think about the costs imposed on community banks by government regulation. And so I wonder if you could talk about sort of both the sort of dark days when all these new regulations were coming your way and what it looks like now.
Sure, Kevin. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, sure, Kevin. Before I do, could I just have a really quick show of hands of how many owners are out here? Business owners. Excellent. Well, that's my constituents, too. That's what we do. I am very proud to be the CEO of a bank in Miami, one of the largest Hispanic-owned banks. When I say Hispanic, there's a lot of Cuban Americans in Miami. And this bank was chartered in 2002 in Miami, which is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and it has one of the largest small business environments. I think there's almost 150,000 in Miami. I was here with the Florida Bankers Association back in 2010 in the really, really dark days. I was actually here when the legislation was passed for Dodd-Frank. And we were about 40 or 50 bankers that were here for 3 or 4 days, and we kept on seeing, and as we were meeting with congressmen and senators and asking them, what is this legislation about? We met with Senator Nelson from Florida, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator John McCain, who was a great friend to the FBA, and they all said one thing. I mean, because what you were hearing is that this is for Wall Street. This is for big banks. Community banks, banks under $10 billion, you're going to be fine. It's not going to affect you. But the words that really scared us all, when it was all said and done, when the voting passed, the people who were voting on it, the senators kept on telling us of their concern of unintended consequences. And boy, that was a Scooby-Doo moment where you just said, uh-oh. You know, everybody got together as we traveled in a bus, and we were saying, are you hearing right? You're going to be fine, but it's the unintended consequences. And I think what happened and what is happening here is the tone at the top has changed everything. And we've been waiting for a decade for reg relief. And as a member of the FBA, we come up here all the time to advocate for it, to speak with Congress members, to speak with the president, and share with us what are the issues that we're dealing with. So finally this year, you know, there was reg reform, the first time in 10 years. We're delighted. I mean, if Dodd-Frank could be repealed, I think we'd be ecstatic. And we recognize that the industry that we are in is a very important industry. It's critical. It's the economic engine to small businesses. It's what supports the small businessman and woman. But the way that this law was put together, and I recognize the crisis times that it was. I mean, they were reacting, maybe overreacting to a crisis that maybe nobody knew how deep it was going to be. But there were unintended consequences, and I believe firmly the community banks suffered because of that. And I've got to thank this administration for what they've done. They've taken a logical approach. I love the math, 2 for 1. You know, you put on one reg, you bring 2 back. And that it's been a game changer for us, not only in creating the confidence, but I looked at the legislation the other day, and off the top of my head as I'm going through it, counted maybe 20 different things that affect community banks. There's no one thing that's super sexy, but when you put them all together, what it gives us from the point of view of cost reduction, efficiencies, this is what we plow right back into the bank. This is where we now can lend more and support you all.
Well, thanks very much. So now I turn to Sandy Roller, who's the president of KNG Energy, which was established in 1990 as a public utility. And like Larry, you started working at your company at a very young age because you were there from 1990 on and are now the president of the company. It's an astonishing American success story. But KNG Energy Services, your KNG Energy, you service residential, commercial, and industrial customers. So not only has the sort of fracking relief, but also regulatory relief for pipelines and so on has had a big impact on your business. I wonder if you could talk about that.
It definitely has. I mean, what we do is appreciate the common sense approach to regulations. I mean, we are highly regulated, and obviously we should be highly regulated. It's, you know, pipelines, we're transporting natural gas through the ground. So, you know, we don't have a problem with regulations. The things that we have a problem with is new regulations without taking a look at existing where you could possibly modify or change existing regulations instead of adding new ones on top of them. And just looking at the existing regulations and then just see those that, you know, do need to be modified. When you think of a public utility, which is what we are, you think of a large company. We're very small. As you said, we started in 1990. We basically started our company from the ground up. We got a tap with a transmission line. We put in some distribution pipelines, served a handful of customers, and then we grew from there. We're now in 5 different counties. But just the no-nonsense approach to regulations, that is that's what we appreciate from this administration.
So specifically, if a new customer needs you to lay a pipe to their business, so is it a lot easier now, or like what would so what would you have to do say the trickiest thing that would, you know, interact with government regulation?
Well, you know, the thing that's happening right now with the president's executive orders, the good thing is there's been no new regulations, but you know, what is happening right now, and the American Gas Association, along with its members, have basically give recommendations on those that should be changed. Okay, so at this particular point, nothing has changed, but it is coming. But at times it is difficult for us to lay a new pipeline. You were earlier talking about navigable waters. I mean, if we need to put a pipeline under a stream, our basically project is going to come to a halt because we need to go to the Army Corps of Engineers to get a permit. And that takes time and that takes money. That takes us getting our attorneys involved. And so it does, things like that, it does make it more difficult for us to put in a pipeline.
So you had mentioned new ones too. I just kind of wonder, can you remember a new one that really upset your business in the past, or am I getting too much into the weeds? So was there some time in 2005 or 2012 or something where all of a sudden you had to change the way you were doing stuff because of some new reg?
Well, you know, some of those that are coming, let me just give you an example of one that's pending that hasn't been put in effect just because it's been put on hold saying, okay, maybe we just need to take a look at this. They wanted to, basically is the plastic pipeline rule. What they wanted to do was every piece of equipment or every supply that we put in the ground to know where it was put and what was put in the ground. Now, as a small company, we already do that. You know, everything that we put in the ground, we have one construction crew. Everything we put in the ground, we have it documented for that particular project. But what that regulation is gearing toward is everything in our industry has to be barcoded. So not only is that going to affect cost for us, all of our vendors that made them, you know, changed the way that they manufacture all the supplies. And then our industry then would have to have barcoding. Well, that's going to take also a considerable amount of software to make those changes. And as a small company, we don't have the budget for that. Larger utilities may have the budget for that, but we just don't have the budget for that. And, you know, we can do that ourselves right now, just on how we do it with pen and paper.
Well, thanks. That's really interesting. Mick, you've got 2 hats, and you've been also working hard at reforming the CFPB, but I guess I'm not supposed to call it that anymore.
BCFP.
The PCF.
Yeah, no one pays attention to that.
Yeah,
Right.
But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, too.
Yeah, in fact, the comment about Gottlieb sending his folks over to buy pizza. We're having the meeting of some of our advisory boards today across the street. In fact, when I leave here, I'll go back across to those meetings. And one of the things we've talked about doing over there, and the financial services people in the room will appreciate this, is actually making our regulators go and watch a residential closing. I used to do those for a living, and it doesn't take very long to figure them out, but we have a lot of people writing rules and regs on them who have absolutely no idea, other than in a purely academic sense, what they mean. I told a story when I first got over there that the attitude was going to change in the way we regulated. And the story is a real story. It comes from a bank I visited in Charleston, South Carolina about 6 or 7 years ago. They had just had their very first post-Dodd-Frank examination. The young examiner was there with her checklist and asking a bunch of final questions, and she asked the president of the bank, so how do you find the new regulatory regime? And the guy said, thank you so much for asking that question, because it's just killing us. We had to hire 3 people just to fill out your paperwork. We're a little 15-person operation. You know, it's not much, you know, probably just, you guys are not much bigger than that. And he said, so we had to hire these people, and it's going to drive us out of business. And he said the look on the young woman's face was the most frightening thing he'd ever seen in his career. She just lit up, and she said, oh, then it's working. We created 3 jobs. And if you don't understand how to create wealth and you don't understand capitalism and you really do think you can regulate yourself to full employment, you can end up really wound around the axle, which is where we've got to. And that attitude is changing. Yes, we are going to continue to regulate. The story about the chemical business makes absolute perfect sense. If you don't, people are going to get hurt. It's like playing baseball and there's no rules. If I can hit you in the head and not get in trouble, someone's going to get hurt. So we're going to have rules, we're going to have regulations, but we're going to enforce them in such a way as they do what they're supposed to do, which is protect people but not get in the way. And that's what we're doing across the street. The article that I wrote in the Wall Street Journal the day I took over said we're not going to push the envelope anymore. We're still going after bad guys, but we're not looking for ways to sue you. I think that speaks not only for what you're seeing at the Bureau, but also what you're seeing across the federal government. It's just a different attitude. And the graph I was hoping you would show was the business sentiment and the confidence, which actually started going up the day of the election. It wasn't just that they waited to see what we were going to do in the regulatory realm and the tax realm to another extent, but on the day of the election, people knew, okay, things are going to be different now. Things are going to, it's going to be, the government is no longer going to be out to get us for at least the next 4 years, and it is safer to invest our money. And that's about all you can ask for.
Yeah, and to put it in perspective, one of the things that I think that people are unaware of about the United States and regulation here is that amongst all developed nations, we're one of the most heavily regulated countries. And to emphasize that point in the economic report of the president, which as CEA chair I have to oversee the production of, last February, we put out the growth estimates, which were really striking and remarkable, about the extra GDP we could get over the next 10 years if we could just accomplish the seemingly impossible task of reducing our product market regulations to the same level they have in Germany. And we could get double the growth if we could reduce our regulations to the level of Holland. So if you think about European nations and their compunction to regulate things and so on, we were very, very surprised to see that there's that much opportunity. So I wonder, Linda, so you're already seeing small businesses take off. There's been a reversal in this entrepreneurship, and Ivanka talked about it too. Is there more that we have planned? I know I don't want to get ahead of the president's budget. So is it going to reach the point where we have to expand programs because there's so much new small business? Is this something that you guys are studying over there?
Well, I can
What's
tell
next?
You, if I had just, one thing to say that this president clearly has put in place, the United States is open for business. And we have a president, because he came from a business environment, he understands what it's like to be in business. He's got your back. And I think we see that and we feel that. I think that's what leads to, the optimism, that we're seeing on the business indicators. We are open for business. We're deregulating. We're making access to capital easier. That's one of the functions, of SBA, by guaranteeing loans for small businesses to grow. And the business optimism is there. It is growing. New businesses are starting. We're seeing at SBA our guarantee of loan portfolios are growing. In our community projects and all of those things, because people are stepping up. They're not afraid to start their businesses. They're not afraid to take risks. And boy, when you start over-regulating and you start over-taxing, you are going to just kill that. You're just going to dampen that enthusiasm. And when you dampen the enthusiasm, an entrepreneur doesn't want to take any risk, because it takes a lot to commit to a 24/7 business. Because when you start your own business and you're an entrepreneur, that's what it is. It is 24/7. It is your baby. You grow it, you nurture it, you take care of it. And we want our government to have that same perspective of supporting the growth and not tamping it down. I think one of the things, that we're looking at now that was just, introduced by the Department of Labor is our new association health plans. One of the regulations that came out under the former administration, was a lot to do with health care, the individual mandates, and other regulations that I'm sure small business owners, have been dealing with, the cost of premiums. So association health plans is something that you should check with any association you belong to, your Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, local chambers of commerce, they've just done this in Las Vegas, are allowing its members to buy into health plans that the association is going to provide. So that means members from anywhere, as long as they're a member of the chamber, will have access to these association health care plans, reduced premiums, and again, that means more money in a business's pocket. It is the opportunity to hire more people, raise wages, and that's what we're just finding everywhere. Is when we reduce these regulations, that's what's happening. Entrepreneurs do reinvest. They've reinvested with tax cuts. They've reinvested with regulatory relief, and they're going to continue to do that. So just as the reduced regulations, as you said, you don't have to focus so much now on compliance. You put that money back into your business. So that's what we're seeing all over the country. And it's, I agree with Larry Kudlow. We ain't seen the cap on this yet.
Yeah, we could hope that's true. Before I hand it back to Larry, I just for Lou and Sandy, one of the things that, if you go back to President Trump's Economic Club speech, or even just the echoes of it in Larry's recent speech, that as much as we love everybody in this room and we love everybody up on this panel, that it's not about so much business just for business's sake, but rather about making a business-friendly climate, because that's what helps American citizens flourish. So as Larry mentioned, that we all were emotional about the tax reform because we felt that being attractive place to start a business was the way to fix one of the biggest problems our country had, which is that wages weren't growing. And that people didn't feel like they were participating in economic growth anymore. And I wonder, as like a final word before we hand it back to Larry, if first Lou and then Sandy, if you could talk a little bit about how you think the new economic climate that's the result of all of these changes is affecting the people that work for you.
I see it in the economy of South Florida. It's booming. It's booming. It has been for a number of years. It definitely has been over the last two. My bank in particular, and I'll be really blunt, I joined the bank 3 years ago, and it was a bank that was failing. It was a bank that was failing. It was rated a one-star troubled bank. I was the CEO of a much larger bank, had been there for 16 years, and I had the opportunity to join this bank, to bring my team, and to turn it around. And in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, the bank has gone from a one-star troubled institution to a five-star superior institution. A bank that had lost money, and Sandy and I were talking about small businesses losing money and what it takes to break even. In 2016, the bank made a modest profit of $2 million after losing money during the bad times for almost 8 years. It doubled it to $5 million, and we're on track to do over $10 million this year. And our loans are growing, deposits are growing, customers are coming in. The bank's reputation has been completely restored. As a matter of fact, in Miami, it's looked at almost like a Cinderella story. And people want to work here. People want to join us because they've seen what we've done. And by the way, Linda, we made a decision at our board on Monday that we are going to really get into the SBA 7A business. So we're hiring people for that area and going to be talking about putting together all policy and procedures. So I see the economy for what it is. It's very strong. It's not my guess. The numbers are there. Consumer confidence is at an all-time high. We see what's happened with the GDP. We've seen what's happened with the market. This is truly an inflection point for this country. And as a community banker, I am committed to work with you, the people that I serve, to make the best that we can. You know, my job is to help the American businessman and woman become a homeowner. My job is to help the American businessman and woman optimize their business, create new ones. And in the 36 years that I've been doing this, there's been a lot of ups and downs, but I can point to literally billions of dollars that the banks that I have worked in, I've only worked in 3, have been responsible for. The risk that we have taken, and I'm just very excited. I think the administration has done an incredible job, and we're looking to not only support them, but we're looking for more opportunities to make the playing field even better.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Sandy, I wonder, final word. So how has it affected, like, so it sounds like the esprit de corps is really booming at your bank, and how has it affected the way the workers feel when they come to work every day? Have the tax cuts given you the wherewithal to give people pay raises and things like that? How has it affected your workers' lives?
You know, it has. It's made a positive impact, I think, in our employees. Our employees, you know, they're skilled laborers, so they do take pride in their work anyway. And with the good economy and tax reform, it basically has given us, I guess, the opportunity to increase our payroll. We're looking to add 2 more employees. It's giving us the opportunity to put more pipe in the ground, because basically it's improving our cash flow as well.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you all for your interventions. And now, to close us out, I'll invite my friend Larry back up onto the stage.
Terrific. Thank you, all of you. Appreciate it. Quick wrap. You know, one of the things I learned when you raised your hands, small business owners, thank you for coming. You're the backbone of the American economy. You really are. And we're trying to do you good. That's all I'll say. And if you want better, just give a yell. We'll listen to you. I'll close with 2 quick quotes. My current boss: America will truly be the greatest place in the world to invest, hire, grow, and to create new jobs, new technologies, and entire new industries. And my former boss: for America, the best is yet to come. Thank you for coming.